The first time Marcus Chen saw the bulldozers rolling up his driveway, he knew the battle was about to begin. But that morning in early September, as he stood on his wraparound porch with a steaming cup of coffee, watching the yellow machines churn up clouds of dust against the amber sunrise, he couldn't have imagined how spectacularly his neighbors would destroy themselves. Marcus had lived on his 15-acre plot of land for 37 years, long before Willowbrook Heights subdivision existed as anything more than a developer's fever dream. Back then, Cascade Creek meandered peacefully through his property, flanked by towering Douglas firs and wild blackberry thickets. He bought the land fresh out of his civil engineering program, young and idealistic, with visions of building the perfect homestead where nature and human ingenuity could coexist. The little retention dam he constructed 20 years ago was a masterpiece of practical engineering. Nothing fancy, just a carefully designed earthen berm with a concrete spillway that controlled the seasonal flow of Cascade Creek. Every spring, when the mountain snowpack melted and combined with Pacific Northwest rains, the dam collected the excess water, releasing it gradually downstream to prevent the flooding that had plagued the area for generations. Marcus had studied the waters for months, calculated flow rates, and even consulted with the county's environmental engineers before breaking ground. "It's not just about my property," he'd explained to his wife Sarah before she passed 5 years ago. "It's about being a good steward of the land. That water has to go somewhere, and if we don't manage it properly, someone downstream is going to pay the price." The dam had worked flawlessly for 2 decades, turning what used to be a seasonal flood zone into prime real estate, which Marcus realized with bitter irony was exactly what had attracted Pinnacle Development Corporation to purchase the 200-acre parcel downstream from his property in the first place. Willowbrook Heights had risen from former wetlands with stunning speed, 47 custom homes ranging from $800,000 to $1.2 million, complete with manicured lawns, decorative ponds, and streets named after trees that had been clear-cut to make room for the development. The marketing materials boasted about waterfront living and natural creek access, conveniently omitting the fact that the creek only remained stable and attractive because of Marcus's dam upstream. For the first few years, a relationship between Marcus and his new neighbors had been cordial, even friendly. Several homeowners had hiked up to introduce themselves, praising his beautiful property and the peaceful sound of water flowing over his spillway. The Johnsons from Maple Lane had even brought their kids to see the small pond behind the dam, where Marcus fed the ducks and explained how the structure protected everyone during heavy rains. But neighborhoods changed and new residents brought new attitudes. The formation of the Willowbrook Heights Homeowners Association 3 years ago had marked the beginning of the end of that peaceful coexistence. What started as a typical HOA focused on maintaining property values and organizing community events had gradually transformed into something more aggressive, more controlling. The first complaint letter arrived on a Tuesday in March, delivered by certified mail in an envelope bearing the HOA's logo, a stylized willow tree that Marcus noted was a species that hadn't grown naturally in the area for decades. The letter, signed by Hillwood President Patricia Hawthorne, expressed concerns from multiple residents about the unsightly industrial structure on Marcus' property that was negatively impacting the aesthetic appeal and property values of our community. Marcus had read the letter 3 times, each reading increasing his disbelief. Industrial structure. His dam was barely visible from the subdivision, hidden behind a grove of mature cedars he'd specifically planted for privacy. The only way anyone could even see it was by trespassing on his property or using binoculars. He called Patricia Hawthorne that same evening, hoping to clear up what was obviously a misunderstanding. The conversation hadn't gone well. "Mr. Chen, I think you fail to understand the gravity of the situation," Patricia had said in a voice that could freeze water in July. "Our community represents a significant investment, and anything that detracts from our carefully planned aesthetic vision is simply unacceptable. We've consulted with real estate professionals who confirm that industrial structures like yours create liability concerns and property value depression." "Mrs. Hawthorne," Marcus had replied, fighting to keep his voice level, "that dam has been protecting your neighborhood from flooding for 20 years. Without it, your carefully planned aesthetic vision would be underwater every spring." The line had gone quiet for a long moment before Patricia responded, "Mr. Chen, I think you're being rather dramatic. We have modern drainage systems and county flood management. Your little pond is an anachronism, and frankly, it needs to go." That conversation, Marcus would later reflect, was the moment he realized he wasn't dealing with reasonable people. These were individuals who had moved to a flood-prone area during a dry period, built expensive homes on former wetlands, and now wanted to eliminate the very infrastructure that made their lifestyle possible. But Marcus Chen hadn't spent 4 decades as a civil engineer without learning how to fight battles that mattered. As he watched those bulldozers approach his property that September morning, he took a long sip of his coffee and prepared for war. He had no idea that Mother Nature was preparing to choose sides. The legal papers arrived 3 weeks after the bulldozer incident, delivered by a sheriff's deputy who looked genuinely apologetic as he handed Marcus the thick manila envelope. Inside were 17 pages of legal documentation that essentially boiled down to one simple demand: remove the dam or face a lawsuit that would bankrupt him. Marcus spread the papers across his kitchen table, adjusting his reading glasses as he parsed through the legal jargon. The Willowbrook Heights Homeowners Association, represented by the law firm of Crawford, Mitchell and Associates, was alleging that his dam constituted a private obstruction of natural waterways, an unauthorized modification of county drainage systems, and most creatively, a visual pollution hazard affecting community property values. The irony wasn't lost on him. The same people who had built their dream homes on what used to be seasonal wetlands were now claiming he was interfering with natural water flow. Marcus called his own attorney, Jim Reeves, a weathered man in his 60s who specialized in property disputes and had handled Sarah's estate after her passing. Jim's reaction was immediate and profane. They're citing the 1998 County Drainage Ordinance, Jim explained during their meeting the following Monday. Problem is, your dam predates that ordinance by 15 years. You're grandfathered in, but they're claiming you never properly registered it as a permanent water management structure. I have all the permits, Marcus protested, pulling out a thick folder of documentation. Environmental impact study, engineering certifications, county approval, everything. Jim flipped through the papers, his frown deepening. This is good, but it's old. The county reorganized their permitting system twice since then. Technically, you should have re-registered under the new classifications. He looked up at Marcus with sympathy. They're not wrong on the technicality, but they're being vindictive about it. The vindictiveness became apparent at the next HOA meeting, which Marcus attended despite not being a member. Patricia Hawthorne had reluctantly allowed him to speak, but she made it clear his presence was unwelcome. The community center was packed with 43 residents, most of whom Marcus had never met. He recognized a few faces from his early interactions with the neighborhood, but those friendly expressions had been replaced by suspicious stares and crossed arms. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus began, standing at the front of the room with a presentation board he prepared. I understand your concerns, but I need you to understand what you're asking me to remove. He flipped to his first chart, showing the historical flood patterns of Cascade Creek. This area has experienced significant flooding every 2 to 3 years for the past century. The 1982 flood destroyed 6 homes that used to stand where your development is now. The 1995 flood. Mr. Chen, Patricia interrupted from her seat at the head table. We're not here for a history lesson. We're here to discuss the eyesore on your property that's affecting our community. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Marcus felt his patience wearing thin. Mrs. Hawthorne, that eyesore is the only thing standing between your community and a disaster. Last spring, we had the wettest April on record. Without my dam, every home in the lower section of your development would have been flooded. That's ridiculous, called out a man Marcus didn't recognize. We have modern storm drains. This isn't 1982. Marcus turned to address the speaker directly. Sir, what's your name? Brad Morrison. I live on Birch Court. Mr. Morrison, your storm drains are designed to handle normal rainfall, not flood conditions. They were calculated based on the assumption that upstream water flow would remain controlled. My dam provides that control. Patricia stood up, her face flushed with irritation. Mr. Chen, you're not a meteorologist or a city planner. You're trying to scare us into accepting your illegal structure. I'm a civil engineer with 40 years of experience in water management, Marcus replied, his voice rising despite his efforts to remain calm. And that structure isn't illegal, it's grandfathered under existing permits. The meeting devolved from there. Accusations flew back and forth, with residents claiming Marcus was trying to manipulate them and Marcus insisting they were courting disaster. The evening ended with Patricia calling for a formal vote to pursue all legal remedies to force the dam's removal. The measure passed 38-5. Over the following months, the legal battle intensified. The HOA hired environmental consultants who argued that the dam disrupted natural fish migration patterns despite the fact that Cascade Creek had never supported significant fish populations. They brought in property assessors who claimed the structure reduced home values by an average of $50,000 per property. Marcus countered with his own experts. Hydrologists who confirmed the flood risk, environmental engineers who praised the dam's design, and historical researchers who documented the area's flooding history. But expert testimony was expensive and the HOA had deeper pockets. The turning point came when Patricia Hawthorne discovered that Marcus's dam technically fell under a provision of the county code that required annual inspections for private water retention structures over 10 feet in height. Marcus's dam was exactly 11 feet tall, and he hadn't realized the inspection requirement existed. It's a paperwork violation, Jim explained during one of their increasingly frequent meetings. Your dam is perfectly safe and legal, but you've been out of compliance on the annual inspections for 5 years. The county could fine you and order modifications. What kind of modifications? Jim's expression was grim. They could require you to lower it below 10 feet, which would essentially destroy its effectiveness. Or they could order it removed entirely if they determine it's a public safety hazard due to non-compliance. The HOA pounced on this technicality like sharks scenting blood in the water. They petitioned the county to declare the dam a public safety hazard, arguing that an uninspected and potentially unstable structure posed a threat to the downstream community. Marcus knew he was fighting a losing battle when the county inspector arrived in November. The man was young, fresh out of college, and clearly intimidated by the political pressure surrounding the case. Despite Marcus's detailed explanations and engineering documentation, the inspector cited compliance irregularities and recommended a full engineering review. The final blow came just before Christmas. Judge Harold Kimmel, who had been assigned the case, ruled that while Marcus's dam had been legally constructed, his failure to maintain proper inspection records constituted a violation of county safety codes. The court ordered the dam to be brought into compliance or removed within 90 days. Marcus appealed, but the damage was done. The legal fees had drained his savings, and the county had already scheduled an inspection that would likely result in an order for expensive modifications he couldn't afford. On New Year's Eve, as he stood beside his dam listening to the water flow peacefully over the spillway, Marcus made a decision that would haunt him for months to come. He would remove the dam himself rather than let the county contractors destroy it with heavy machinery. He had no way of knowing that the National Weather Service had just issued its preliminary forecast for the coming spring. The wettest season on record was heading straight for the Pacific Northwest. The demolition began on a crisp Monday morning in February, exactly 87 days after Judge Kimmel's ruling. Marcus had spent the previous weeks documenting every aspect of his dam, photographing it from every angle, measuring water flow rates, and creating detailed engineering drawings that he stored in waterproof containers in his basement. If disaster struck, he wanted there to be a record of what had protected the valley for 2 decades. He had hired Tommy Kowalski, a local contractor who specialized in environmental restoration, to handle the removal. Tommy was a third-generation builder who understood the land and had actually helped Marcus with some of the original construction 20 years earlier. "You sure about this, Marcus?" Tommy asked as his crews set up their equipment. "I remember when we built this thing. You had it calculated down to the last cubic foot of water flow." Marcus watched the excavator position itself near the spillway, its mechanical arm poised like a metal dinosaur preparing to feed. "I don't have a choice, Tommy. It's either this or let the county bring in their crew and turn it into a bigger mess." What Marcus hadn't expected was the audience. Word of the demolition had spread through Willowbrook Heights like wildfire, and by 9 a.m. nearly 20 residents had gathered on the public easement that bordered his property. They brought folding chairs, coffee thermoses, and smartphones to document their victory. Patricia Hawthorne arrived in her silver BMW at precisely 9:30, stepping out in what Marcus could only describe as demolition attire, designer jeans, hiking boots that had clearly never seen a trail, and a jacket that probably cost more than Tommy's equipment rental. She was accompanied by 3 other HOA board members, all wearing expressions of smug satisfaction. "Mr. Chin," Patricia called out as she approached the worksite. "I wanted to personally ensure this process goes smoothly. The community has been looking forward to this day for quite some time." Marcus turned from where he'd been consulting with Tommy about the removal sequence. "Mrs. Hawthorne, I'm sure they have. I hope they're equally enthusiastic about what comes next." "What comes next is an improvement in everyone's property values and a return to natural water flow," she replied, pulling out her phone to take photos. "The environmental consultant we hired assured us that removing this obstruction will actually improve the creek's ecosystem." Tommy snorted from where he was operating the excavator controls. "Lady, the only thing that's going to improve is the flood insurance business." Patricia shot him a withering look. "I don't believe we asked for your opinion, Mr. Kowalski, and I've been working this valley for 30 years. You folks have no idea what you're unleashing." The first bite of the excavator into the dam's structure sent a shiver through Marcus that had nothing to do with the February cold. 20 years of carefully placed earth and stone began to crumble, and water immediately started flowing faster through the breach. The sound changed from the controlled whisper of water over the spillway to the urgent gurgle of an unrestrained stream. As the morning progressed and more of the dam disappeared, Marcus noticed something that the celebrating homeowners didn't. The water level downstream was already rising. Cascade Creek, which normally ran about 2 feet deep through the Willowbrook Heights development, was now running at nearly 3 feet and moving faster than he'd seen it in years. "Tommy," Marcus called out during the lunch break, "look at that flow rate." Tommy followed his gaze downstream to where the creek curved through the subdivision. Yeah, I see it. We're still in dry season, and it's already running high. Marcus pulled out his phone and checked the weather forecast. What he saw made his stomach drop. Tommy, we need to talk. They walked away from the crowd of spectators, most of whom were taking selfies with the partially demolished dam in the background. The long-range forecast just updated, Marcus said quietly. We're looking at a major atmospheric river system hitting the region in 3 weeks. Could be the biggest storm in 20 years. Tommy's weathered face went pale. Jesus, Marcus, with the dam gone? I know. Marcus looked back at the Willowbrook Heights residents, who were pointing excitedly at the faster-flowing water as if it were an entertainment feature. I have to warn them. Marcus approached Patricia Hawthorne, who was directing one of the other board members and taking video of the demolition for the HOA newsletter. Mrs. Hawthorne, I need to speak with you about the weather forecast. She barely looked up from her phone. Mr. Chen, unless you're here to apologize for the years of trouble you've caused this community, I don't think we have anything to discuss. There's a major storm system approaching, without the dam to control the flow. Mr. Chen, Patricia interrupted, finally looking at him with undisguised irritation, your scare tactics didn't work in court, and it won't work now. We have modern drainage systems and county flood management. Your little pond was never necessary. Marcus tried one more time. The county flood management system was designed with my dam in place. The calculations assumed controlled upstream flow. Without it, we have a beautiful natural creek flowing through our community exactly as nature intended. Patricia turned back to her documentation, dismissing him with a wave of her hand. By 4 p.m., the dam was gone. 20 years of engineering, 2 decades of flood protection reduced to scattered piles of earth and broken concrete. The creek now ran wild and fast through the valley, carrying spring snowmelt and recent rains directly into the Willowbrook Heights subdivision at twice its previous volume. As Tommy's crew finished cleaning up the site, Marcus stood where his dam had been, watching the water rush past with increasing urgency. The sound was wrong, too loud, too fast, too angry. This was how the creek had sounded before he'd built the dam, back when floods were a regular occurrence. The HOA celebration moved to Patricia Hawthorne's house that evening. Marcus could see the lights and hear the laughter from his porch, where he sat monitoring the water levels with growing concern. The creek was now running at 4 feet deep through the subdivision, lapping at the edges of several backyards. He called the county emergency management office and spoke to Janet Morrison, the flood coordinator. Janet, this is Marcus Chen up on Cascade Creek. I need to report a significant change in water flow patterns that could affect flood risk downstream. What kind of change, Marcus? The retention dam on my property was removed today. We're looking at uncontrolled flow into the Willowbrook Heights area, and there's a major storm system approaching. There was a pause. Marcus, I thought that dam removal was court-ordered. Didn't the HOA get permits for increased drainage capacity? Marcus felt his heart sink. What permits? Hold on, let me check. Here it is. Permit applications submitted by Willowbrook Heights HOA for enhanced natural drainage systems to accommodate increased water flow following upstream obstruction removal. It was approved last month. Janet, what enhanced systems? What did they actually install? Another pause, longer this time. According to the permit, they were supposed to install 3 additional storm drain outlets and reinforce the creek banks with riprap. The permit shows completion certification dated last Friday. Marcus looked downstream at the subdivision, where the creek banks remained unchanged and no new drainage infrastructure was visible. Janet, I don't see. Marcus woke at 4:17 a.m. on March 15th to the sound of rain hammering his roof like artillery fire. He'd been monitoring the weather obsessively since the dam's removal, and the forecast had been dire enough. But this was beyond anything the meteorologists had predicted. The storm system that was supposed to arrive gradually over the weekend had instead slammed into the Pacific Northwest like a freight train in the pre-dawn darkness. He pulled up the weather radar on his phone, and what he saw made his blood run cold. The entire Pacific Ocean from California to Alaska was a solid wall of green and red, with violent bands of precipitation rotating inland in waves. The National Weather Service had issued a flash flood emergency for the entire region, the first time such a warning had been used in over a decade. Marcus threw on rain gear and grabbed his flashlight, splashing through ankle-deep water just to get from his house to his truck. The creek, which had been running high since the dam's removal, was now a raging torrent that had already jumped its banks and was spreading across his lower pastures. As he drove the quarter-mile down to the main road that served Willowbrook Heights, his headlights illuminated a scene from a disaster movie. Cascade Creek had tripled in size, transforming from a modest waterway into a churning brown river that was already lapping at the edges of Maple Lane. the subdivision's lowest street. Marcus parked on higher ground and called 911, his hands shaking as he tried to hold the phone steady against the driving rain. 911, what's your emergency? This is Marcus Chen on Cascade Creek Road. We have a major flooding emergency developing in the Willowbrook Heights subdivision. The creek has jumped its banks and is rising fast. Sir, we're receiving multiple flood reports throughout the region. Are there people in immediate danger? Marcus looked at the 47 homes of Willowbrook Heights, most still dark at this early hour, the residents sleeping peacefully while floodwater crept closer to their front doors. Yes, there are 47 houses that are about to be underwater. People need to evacuate now. We'll dispatch emergency crews as soon as possible, sir, but we have multiple simultaneous emergencies. Can you safely warn the residents? Marcus thought about Patricia Hawthorne's last words to him. We don't need your help, Mr. Chen. We never did. Then he looked at the houses where children slept, where families had built their lives, where his former neighbors were about to lose everything because of their leader's arrogance and stupidity. I'll do what I can, he said. The first house he reached was the Johnsons on Maple Lane, the family who had brought their kids to see his dam years ago. Marcus pounded on their door, leaning on the doorbell until lights came on inside. Marcus? Dave Johnson opened the door in his bathrobe, squinting against the flashlight beam. What the hell are you doing here at 4 a.m? Dave, you mean to get your family out of here right now. The creek is flooding, and it's going to get a lot worse. Dave looked past Marcus at the rain, then down at the water that was now flowing across his front lawn. Oh shit, Kelly, kids, we need to go. The Johnsons were out of their house in 10 minutes, loading their car with essentials, while Marcus moved to the next house. But as the minutes passed and the water continued rising, it became clear that he couldn't warn everyone in time. Marcus grabbed his phone and called Patricia Hawthorne directly. The phone rang 6 times before her groggy voice answered. This better be important. Do you know what time it is? Patricia, this is Marcus Chen. You need to activate the neighborhood emergency alert system right now. The creek is flooding and everyone needs to evacuate immediately. There was a pause, then Patricia's voice, sharp with irritation. Mr. Chen, if you think you can create some kind of fake emergency to make yourself look like a hero. For God's sake, Patricia, look outside. The water is already in your neighborhood. I'm not looking at anything. I'm hanging up and calling the police about harassment. The line went dead. Marcus stared at his phone in disbelief and looked at Willowbrook Heights, where lights were finally starting to come on as residents noticed the rising water. But it was too late for an orderly evacuation. By 6 a.m., Cascade Creek had become a monster. The water was now 4 feet deep on Maple Lane and rising by inches every few minutes. Marcus had managed to wake 12 families, but 35 houses were still occupied, the residents either sleeping through the emergency or refusing to believe the danger. The Hendersons on Birch Court, the family with a new baby, were trapped in their second story as water poured through their first floor. Marcus could see them at their upstairs window, the father holding the infant while the mother waved frantically for help. Marcus tried to reach them with his truck, but the current was too strong and the water too deep. He called 911 again, screaming over the roar of the flood. I need swift water rescue at 247 Birch Court. Family with infant trapped on second floor. Sir, all our swift water teams are deployed. Emergency services are overwhelmed. We're doing everything we can. Marcus watched helplessly as more houses filled with water. The Morrison's house, Brad Morrison, who had dismissed Marcus's warnings about storm drains, was now completely flooded on the first floor. The family was visible in their upstairs bedroom window, trapped and terrified. At 7 a.m., Patricia Hawthorne's house began to flood. Marcus could see her silver BMW floating in her driveway, bobbing like a toy boat as water poured through her front door. Her house, ironically, was one of the highest in the subdivision, but the water had risen so fast and so high that even the elevated properties were being inundated. His phone rang. Patricia Hawthorne's number. Marcus. Her voice was small, terrified, completely different from the imperious tone she used for years. Marcus, we need help. The water is everywhere. It's rising so fast. Marcus looked at her house where he could see figures moving frantically in the upstairs windows. Despite everything, despite years of legal battles and personal attacks, his heart went out to them. Where are you now, Patricia? Second floor. The whole first floor is underwater. My husband, he has a heart condition. The stress. Marcus, I think I made a terrible mistake. Before Marcus could respond, he heard a tremendous crack echoing across the valley. A massive Douglas fir, undermined by the flooding, had toppled across Willow Drive, crushing 2 houses and blocking the main evacuation road. The situation had just gone from desperate to catastrophic. By 9 a.m., 31 houses in Willowbrook Heights were completely flooded. 6 families were trapped in their second stories, 4 houses had been destroyed by debris, and the entire subdivision had become a lake dotted with rooftops and submerged vehicles. Marcus' property, protected by the natural rise in elevation where his dam had once stood, remained dry. From his porch, he could see the entire disaster unfolding below. A community that had fought so hard to eliminate his flood protection, now discovering exactly why that protection had been necessary. The first rescue helicopter arrived at 10:30 a.m., followed by swift water rescue teams from 3 counties. Marcus guided them to the trapped families, his local knowledge proving invaluable as they navigated the flooded subdivision. The Hendersons were rescued first, the baby crying as they were lifted from their upstairs window. The Morrisons came next, but Brad Morrison's face a mask of shock and disbelief as he was pulled from the water. One by one, the trapped residents were evacuated to safety. Patricia Hawthorne was among the last to be rescued. As the helicopter lifted her and her husband from their flooded home, Marcus could see her looking down at the devastation that had once been Willowbrook Heights. 47 houses reduced to rooftops and debris, years of careful planning and expensive construction undone in a single morning. As the rain finally began to ease that afternoon, Marcus stood on his porch surveying the destruction. The subdivision where he'd once been welcome as a neighbor and vilified as an enemy now looked like a war zone. Cars were stacked against houses, furniture floated among the trees, and the once pristine lawns were buried under 3 feet of mud and debris. Cascade Creek, finally beginning to recede, had carved a new channel straight through the middle of what used to be Birch Court. The water had found its natural floodplain, exactly where Marcus had predicted it would go 20 years ago, when he built his dam to prevent this exact disaster. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Mr. Chen, this is Patricia Hawthorne. When you have time, we need to talk. All of us need to talk. We owe you an apology that words can't express." Marcus read the message twice, then looked out at the devastated subdivision. An apology wouldn't rebuild the destroyed homes or replace the lost possessions. It wouldn't undo the legal battles or restore the 20 years of flood protection that had been recklessly thrown away. But it might be a beginning. 3 weeks after the flood, Marcus Chen sat in the Willowbrook Heights Community Center, one of the few buildings in the subdivision that had survived intact due to its elevated foundation, facing 37 residents whose lives had been forever changed by a single morning's deluge. The room smelled of disinfected and desperation, filled with people who had lost everything but were still trying to figure out how to move forward. Patricia Hawthorne looked like she aged a decade in 3 weeks. Her perfectly styled hair was now pulled back in a simple ponytail, her designer clothes replaced by a Red Cross volunteer t-shirt and jeans. She sat in the front row with her husband Robert, whose heart condition had worsened significantly since the flood. The medical bills alone were crushing them, but that was the least of their problems. "Before we begin," Patricia said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I want to say something to Marcus that should have been said years ago." She stood up, her hands trembling slightly. "Marcus, I owe you an apology that goes beyond words. We all do. You tried to warn us, you tried to protect us, and we destroyed the very thing that could have saved our homes." A murmur went through the crowd. Some residents nodded in agreement, while others looked uncomfortable with the admission. Brad Morrison, whose house had been completely destroyed, shifted in his seat and cleared his throat. "That's all well and good, Patricia, but apologizing doesn't rebuild my house. My insurance company is claiming this was a preventable flood and they're denying coverage. My kids are sleeping on my brother's couch, and I've got a mortgage on a house that no longer exists." Marcus had expected this. The insurance situation was a nightmare that was still unfolding. Flood insurance typically didn't cover damages from man-made alterations to natural water flow patterns. The removal of Marcus's dam, combined with the fraudulent drainage permits filed by the HOA's law firm, had given insurance companies the perfect excuse to deny claims across the entire subdivision. "Mr. Morrison," Marcus said carefully, "I understand your frustration, but we need to focus on what we can control going forward." "What we can control?" Brad's voice rose with anger. "You could have refused to remove the dam. You could have fought harder." The room erupted in arguments, with residents taking sides. Some defended Marcus, pointing out that he'd been forced to remove the dam by court order. Others blamed him for not doing more to resist. The old divisions were reasserting themselves, even in the face of shared catastrophe. Marcus stood up, and gradually the room quieted. "You're right, Mr. Morrison. I could have fought harder. I could have ignored the court order and forced them to send sheriff's deputies to arrest me. Maybe that would have bought us more time, maybe not. But here's what I can do now." He pulled out a folder of documents he'd been preparing for weeks. "I've been working with hydrologists from the State University and engineers from the Army Corps of Engineers. We can rebuild flood protection for this area, but it's going to require cooperation from everyone." Patricia leaned forward. "What kind of cooperation?" First, the lawsuit against me needs to be dropped completely, along with any claims for damages related to the original dam. Second, the HOA needs to be dissolved and reformed with new leadership. Third, everyone needs to agree to a comprehensive flood management plan that includes upstream retention, downstream channelization, and proper drainage infrastructure. The room was silent as residents absorbed the implications. "How much will this cost?" asked Janet Wilson, whose house had been damaged but not destroyed. Marcus consulted his notes. Approximately $2.8 million for comprehensive flood protection. The stake has indicated they'll cover 60% if we can demonstrate community commitment and proper planning. That leaves about $1.1 million to be split among property owners. More silence. For people who had just lost most of their possessions and were fighting insurance companies, finding $20,000 to $30,000 per household was essentially impossible. "There's another option," Marcus continued. "I've been approached by Cascade County about donating my property for a regional flood control project. They would build a proper retention facility, much larger than my original dam, and establish the entire area as a flood management zone." "What does that mean for us?" Patricia asked. "It means the county would buy out your properties at pre-flood values. You have enough money to relocate and start over somewhere safer." The room erupted again, but this time the tone was different. Instead of anger, there was a mixture of hope and despair. Hope for a financial lifeline, despair at losing the community they tried to build. Dave Johnson, who had been one of the first families Marcus warned during the flood, raised his hand. "Marcus, what about you? What do you get out of this?" Marcus had been expecting this question too. "The county buyout includes my property. I'd receive fair market value and have to relocate as well." "But this is your home," Patricia said. "You've lived here for 37 years. You built everything here with your wife." Marcus looked out the window at his property, where Sarah's garden was just beginning to show signs of spring despite the recent trauma. "Sarah and I always said this land didn't belong to us. We were just taking care of it for a while. If turning it into a flood control project means no other families go through what you've experienced, then that's what we should do." In the following hour, the discussion moved from emotional to practical. The county's offer was generous but not overwhelming. Most residents would break even financially, but they'd have to start over completely in new communities. The alternative, trying to rebuild in a flood-prone area without adequate protection, was financially and practically impossible for most families. When the meeting ended, Patricia approached Marcus as the room cleared out. "Marcus, I need you to know something. 3 years ago, when we started the HOA, I genuinely believed we were protecting our community. I thought your dam was an outdated eyesore that we outgrown. I was so focused on property values and appearances that I couldn't see the bigger picture." Marcus nodded. "I understand, Patricia. You weren't trying to hurt anyone. But I did hurt people. I hurt you, I hurt my neighbors, and ultimately I hurt my own family. Robert's medical bills are going to bankrupt us even with the buyout." Her voice cracked slightly. "I keep thinking about that morning when you called to warn me and I hung up on you. If I had just listened." "Patricia, you can't change what happened. None of us can. The only thing we can do is make sure it doesn't happen again." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "The county wants to name the new flood control facility after you. The Marcus Chen Regional Flood Management Center. Will you let them?" Marcus thought about Sarah, about the 20 years of peaceful mornings listening to water flow over his dam's spillway, about the community that had welcomed him and then turned against him and then needed him to save them. Only if they include a memorial garden for everyone who lost their homes. This disaster shouldn't be about me. It should be a reminder of what happens when we ignore the natural world. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the parking lot of his new home, a small cottage in the foothills 20 miles away, reading a newspaper article about the groundbreaking ceremony for the Marcus Chen Regional Flood Management Center. The facility would protect not just the former Willowbrook Heights area, but 3 downstream communities as well. It was designed to handle floods far beyond anything the region had experienced, with multiple retention areas, spillways, and emergency overflow channels. The article included quotes from several former Willowbrook Heights residents. Patricia Hawthorne, now living in a rental apartment while her husband recovered from heart surgery, had told the reporter, "Marcus Chen tried to save us from our own ignorance. The least we can do is make sure his wisdom protects future generations." Marcus folded the newspaper and walked to his mailbox, where he found a letter with no return address. Inside was a hand-drawn picture from the Henderson baby, now a toddler, showing a stick figure man standing next to a blue squiggle labeled water. At the bottom, in a child's unsteady handwriting, someone had written, "Thank you for saving us." Marcus smiled and pinned the drawing to his refrigerator, next to a photo of Sarah in her garden. Outside his kitchen window, a small creek ran peacefully through his new property. Too small for a dam, too gentle for concern, just right for an old engineer who had learned that sometimes the greatest victory comes from knowing when to let go.